Good morning and welcome to another edition of the Daily Fix. I am your usual host, Advocate Tulo Hoyani. This morning, I would like to take a look into the investigation of the Senzo Meyiwa matter. I said to you in my previous videos that we'll be dissecting the evidence. It is important, first of all, to understand the investigation. Once you have understood what the investigation entails, we are then able to say this is the sort of evidence that was gathered at the crime scene, which will then, lead or end up in the conviction of those involved. So, an investigation is very important because once an investigation is then done, the conclusion of the investigation forms the backbone of the case. This is what is going to be handed to the office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. This is the basis upon which charges are going to be formulated against whoever is found to have been implicated in the commission of the crime under investigation. Now, let us begin by doing this. We have a crime scene. Senzo Meyiwa is reported to have been killed in Vosloorus at the home of Kelly Khumalo. There were several other people there. Kelly Khumalo was there. Sister Zandi was there. Tumelo Madlala was there. Mthokozi Sithwala was there. And several other people. So the police get a report that a crime has been committed in this place. They then go to this place as part of the investigation. That's the first step. They go to the scene of crime or the crime scene. When they get to the crime scene, all they have to do, or the first thing that they have to do, is to ensure that the crime scene is secure. In other words, they must throw a police cordon around the crime scene, to mark it as such, so that nobody interferes with the crime scene. Nobody comes into the crime scene or makes any contact with the crime scene, so that everything is left as it is. In other words, there must be no tampering. And only a few people, very few people, will usually be allowed to access the crime scene. The reason being, like I've just indicated, to preserve its integrity so that a proper investigation can be done. In the Senzo Meyiwa investigation, the first responders never treated that place as a crime scene. In spite of the fact that a crime had been reported, a murder a murder for that matter, they went to the crime scene, and when they got to the crime scene, they were told that Senzo Meyiwa had been shot by some intruders, and they immediately left the crime scene unattended. This is basic. This is shocking. They then left the scene unattended and rushed to the hospital. You see, every forensic investigator or police investigator ought to know this. It is so basic to any investigation that you cannot leave a crime scene unattended. Now you ask yourself, why were the investigators not treating this place like a crime scene? Get it cordoned off, limit access to the crime scene, and treat it like any other crime scene. I'm sure a lot of you would have seen how the Lusikisiki matter was investigated on TV. There was recently a massacre in Lusikisiki. And as I think some 18 people were killed. Once the police got to the crime scene in Lusikisiki, they cordoned off that crime scene. We saw that police cordon there. In the Senzo Meyiwa trial, or rather in the Senzo Meyiwa investigation, none of this was done. the crime scene is left compromised completely, vulnerable to contamination by whoever. Why did the police not secure the crime scene? Which is the first and most basic thing that they ought to do, right? So they left the crime scene vulnerable to contamination, and it did get contaminated. Because we know as a matter of fact that crime scene was cleaned up. Who would have had an interest to have the crime scene cleaned up? Who would have had that kind of interest? But we know the crime scene was cleaned up because it was not cordoned off and access to it was not restricted. Everybody did as they wished. This is why we now have the cleaning up. The cleaning up had serious consequences and severely compromised the crime scene, such that a proper investigation under those circumstances would never have been investigated. This is shocking to say the least, right? You also know of the presence of many police officers at the crime scene. You see a crime scene, when you secure a crime scene, you've got to make sure that only a few people, are authorized to enter the crime scene. This is also to avoid contamination, because even the investigators themselves, if they're not careful, they can contaminate the crime scene. So they've got to limit limit the number of people who have access to the crime scene to certain people who are absolutely essential for that investigation. We have heard of the presence of very senior police officers on the crime scene, people of the rank of lieutenant general and general, who ordinarily have no business at a crime scene at that particular point in time. So the presence of these many police officers, left the door open for contamination. Anybody could walk in and out of that place, including the many police officers, the senior police officers who ordinarily, only have to exercise command and control over the investigation, were there physically. And they contributed in one way or another to the contamination of that crime scene. They had no business being there. Now, this is what we have, and this is one of the shocking things that we see in the Senzo Meyiwa investigation. Let me move forward and say, all the people in the house should have been subjected to something called a gun residue test. A gun residue test works this way. After you fire a gun, some residue of the gunpowder is likely to be left on you. In other words, it will usually be found on your hand or even on your clothes sometimes. So what the police would have done is to subject all the people in the house to a gunshot residue test, to determine that none of them had fired the bullet that killed Senzo. In other words, to make a link to any of them who had probably fired the gun, the fatal gunshot wound that killed Senzo. If that person had been in the house and a gunshot residue test had been done, it would have been determined that there'd be no intruders in that place. So, wherever a gun is fired in the commission of a crime, and there are people in that vicinity or in that place, a gunshot residue test is invariably undertaken, so that you rule out any of the people in and around Senzo as a possible shooter. None of this was done. This gunshot residue test is also a very, very basic thing that the police do at every crime scene where a firearm has been fired. I have said we have to have a common understanding of the Senzo Meyiwa matter. And to do that, I'm beginning with the investigation. It is the investigation that will lead us to what is happening in court. Because here you see I'm looking at the forensic evidence. Now, what is forensic evidence? That should not bother you too much. Forensic evidence is scientific evidence gathered at the scene. In other words, the employment of the gunshot residue test. That's a forensic tool that the police employ. Now, as we do that, remember we are building a docket 000 that from its very inception, this investigation was doomed. It was never done properly, and no proper investigation, no accurate result could have come out of such an improper investigation. We have looked at the crime scene, the scene of crime. Kelly Kumalo's house was never for one moment treated like a crime scene, contrary to standard police practice. None of the people who were with Senzo in that house, right? The last people to have been with Senzo in that house were never treated as suspects. Now, this is curious because if I die in your presence and you are the last person to have seen me alive, I become a silent suspect. I may not have necessarily killed you, but the police investigation will begin by focusing on me. And once that police investigation excludes me, it can then move in any other direction. None of the people in the house were treated as suspects. None of the standard procedure was followed. And the Senzo Meyiwa investigation was compromised. To this day, that gunshot residue test has never been done. To link, and it is too late now, because a gunshot residue test must be done immediately. Because you can't do it 5 years down the line, because the residue will be gone, or a week later, the residue will not be there. So, from its inception, this was an ill-fated investigation. And that is tragic for the Meyiwa family. It was an ill-fated investigation. It was never, or it would never achieve the purpose of identifying the true killers of Senzo Meyiwa. Under the circumstances that I've just outlined to you, that was completely impossible. In the next episode, I am taking up the forensic evidence. I am taking up the forensic evidence just to take it a step further and show you just what went wrong. And a lot went wrong here. Not only wrong, but horribly wrong. Having said that, in my last episode, I tripped over my words. My number, let me give you my number again. My number is 063 640 4329. Thank you for those who picked up this. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. Sometimes the smallest things in this world can actually, turn out to be the biggest problem that you sometimes go through. So that is my number. Thank you for watching this video. Please kindly subscribe. I always said to you, let us make every view a subscription. Please, please subscribe to this channel. Support this initiative and have a nice day.